So we are beginning the chapter over spinal cord, nerves, and spinal reflexes. And so most of what we're going to focus on with this chapter is the anatomy of the spinal cord and the spinal nerves, which is going to take up most of the chapter. And even we'll talk about a few particular nerves and what they do or what muscles they influence. So it's kind of fun. Let me change my color real quick so you can see when I do right. Okay, that was an awful color choice. All right, so the spinal cord, just looking at general anatomy here, the length of the spinal cord is about 18 inches long. So if I pull out the yardstick here, from 1 to 18 is this much. Does that seem right to you? Is that what you would expect? I mean, so from the base of my neck, if I really want to measure this, the base, because it's continuous with your brainstem. Let's see, if we expected it to go all the way down to the bottom of the coccyx and the sacrum, we would be expecting something closer to like 26 to 28 inches. So something happened there. When you were born, parents brag about how long their babies were, between 19 inches, 20 inches, 21 inches in length, the entire baby. Well, that's awesome. And they grow fast. Children grow really fast. And thing is, with our spinal cord, it is not able to keep up with the growth rate of an adult, of a human, of a child, an infant. So the spinal cord can't really stretch that far to accommodate our growth. So what happens instead is that we have our spinal cord ending right here, and all those spinal nerves that branch off of it, they still do, and they end up traveling down the vertebral canal as a bundle of nerves. And so it's kind of neat. We'll talk about the names of all that in a little bit. The spinal cord is about 1/2 inch wide, so I discovered that's about the width of my pinky. If I just set it down on the table or whatever, it's about the width of my pinky is 1/2 inch. So think about that. That's how big your spinal cord is in diameter around. It's not that big. When we've dissected cow spinal cords before, I thought, these are going to be big spinal cords, marginally bigger than what humans should be. It was kind of a surprise. So your spinal cord, notice it says it ends between L1 and L2, which is this spot right here. And we kind of mentioned already why. It's a growth, developmental thing. Nerves can stretch. Nerves can grow. But when you have something really complicated like a spinal cord, which is a huge mix of nerves and gray matter, and it's a much more complicated arrangement than with a spinal nerve, you're not going to be able to get that same amount of stretching and growth with that spinal cord. One neat thing about the spinal cord is that it is bilaterally symmetrical. Sorry. So it's bilaterally symmetrical, which is the same as our body. So, for example, if we did a mid-sagittal cut down the middle here, my two halves would be basically the same. Not my internal organs, though. That's not bilaterally, but all of the external features, arms, legs, ears, eyes, all of that is bilaterally symmetrical. So then you have the same thing with the spinal cord. And we'll talk about that when we look at a picture of the spinal cord. And so the spinal cord extends from the opening at the base of our skull, which is the foramen magnum, which is part of what bone? Can you remember? What's the one back here? Yeah, our occipital bone. Very good. So that's where it extends to. And then there are 4 regions, okay? And so we have a cervical region. Can you guys remember? The cervical region is from C1 to C7, right. And then we have our thoracic region. It's showing it right here. Whoop. And that's from T1, right? T12. Excellent. And then we have our, I don't know where the probably about here. Lumbar starts at L1 to L what? 5. And then we have our sacral region, and that can be S1 to S4 or 5. It kind of depends on the person. Can't see my writing there. And then you even have your little coccyx. Okay, so those are four main regions: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral. So we're going to talk about the specifics about those. Okay, so first of all, spinal nerves. So our spinal cord gives rise, as it says, to 31 pairs of spinal nerves. And they're named for the vertebra, based on the vertebra from where they originate. And then, so there's a little bit of a caveat there. There is something, it changes with age. Notice here. So cervical nerves are named for the vertebra below it. Okay? And so if we look over at our model over here, our spinal cord model, we go all the way to top of the, here's the occipital bone. What's the very first cervical vertebra? The atlas, right. Notice, I don't know if you can see this, there is spinal nerves coming out between the atlas and the occipital bone. So, this spinal nerve is named for the vertebra below it. So in this case, it's going to be spinal nerve 1. Okay? And so you're going to end up, we have how many cervical vertebrae? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so then that means we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spinal nerves in the cervical region. And that's the only place where they count that way. Okay? All the other nerves are named for the vertebra above. Okay? Okay, we've mentioned this before in lab last semester, where in the spinal cord there's areas that are enlarged and areas that are more narrow in the diameter. And so these areas of enlargement are in the cervical region, so in our neck, so there's our cervical enlargement. Notice it is a little fatter here compared to like the thoracic region where it's really narrow. And then our other enlargement is right here, our lumbosacral enlargement. And those two enlargement areas, I'm going to erase that part, correspond with the fact that you have arms and nerves that need to branch down to those arms. And so that corresponds to the cervical enlargement. And then lots of nerves that need to branch down, even going down the legs, which means you have it's enlarged here as well. So more neurologically going on at those junctions. And so that's where you'll have those enlargements because it's supplying your arms and your legs. Now, I'm going to erase this little part. I love it. I can erase with my finger. It's great. So a couple structures that you need to know. One is the cona medullaris. So here's right here. The cona medullaris, medullaris is kind of this tapered tip or end of the spinal cord. Okay, so it kind of tapers off to a tip. And so that kind of cone to the tip is called the cona medullaris. That's the end of the spinal cord, the inferior end of the spinal cord. Never fear, it is anchored in your vertebral column. We'll talk about how it's anchored in just a moment. And then the other one we've already kind of talked about is the cauda equina, right? Did we mention that? What does cauda equina mean? Oh, go away. Horse's tail. Yeah, and so it kind of looks like that because you have all these spinal nerves branching off here, and they are still going to come out between the correct vertebra, so they're going to travel in a bundle down that vertebral canal until it's time for spinal nerve to branch out between the vertebra. So that's why you have just a huge bundle of them all lined up. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, so talking about the meningeal layers, we have done that before. We're going to do it again. And now you will need to know in good detail. So there's 3 major layers of connective tissue that surrounds the central nervous system. So both the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, so it's continuous with both of them. And so the outermost layer, or the most superficial, you could say, is the dura mater. Here's our dura mater. I'm working on my handwriting. Superficial. I did it. Okay, so, and if you remember the dura mater in lab, if you saw it or touched it, that nice thick membrane that we had, that's what it's like. So even if you remove part of your skull, like if there was someone's going into brain surgery, then there's this really thick, tough membrane. That's your dura mater. That is just another layer of protection. There's a bunch of layers of protection there to protect your brain. So very thick. And notice, so it is continuous with the epineurium. You guys remember what the epineurium is? We had those 3 layers, or bundling layers to a nerve. So the connective tissue that surrounds one single axon is your endoneurium. The one that bundles them into a group of fascicles, your perineurium. And then the last one, the outermost one, is your epineurium. Okay, so our middle layer is our arachnoid mater. And what does arachnoid remind you of? Spider. Yeah, so arachnoid mater is the middle layer, and it has this wonderful, here I'll try to draw it. You have a little membrane, and then you have all these little wispies, okay, that look kind of like spider webs, which is why they call it arachnoid mater. And another interesting thing about the arachnoid mater is that in this thin wispy space, you have fluid that's kind of moving in and out of those fibers. Can you guys remember what kind of fluid might be in that space? Take a wild guess. The cerebral spinal fluid? Yeah. So you have cerebral spinal fluid that's in that wispy area. Okay? And just as an FYI, it will be up on the next slide, but between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater, it's filled with serous fluid. So there's 2 types of fluid that are involved, and that's going to show up on the next slide. Okay? So then our deepest layer is our piometer. And if you remember when we were dissecting brains, it was super delicate, really thin. It was hard to remove. And yes, as it says, it definitely was bound tightly to the surface of the brain and the spinal cord. And it is just like this, and it helps hold vessels down as well. And one of the neat things is that the piometer helps form what we would call the filium terminale, and you'll be able to see that in a picture in a bit. But the filium terminale, oh, I have a bag full of pens. So if I were just to draw a simple spinal cord, and there's our tip there, the filium terminale that's made from the piometer is just like a rope anchor, and it anchors it down to the coccyx. So it helps hold the spinal cord in place. Let's see, how do we describe that? Yeah, it helps anchor it in place up and down, superior, inferiorly. You guys know what I mean. Okay. And then there's another type of ligament that also helps with anchoring the spinal cord, and this is the denticulate ligament, and the denticulate ligaments are on the sides. Okay? So those are the denticulate, and this is the filium terminale. And so denticulate ligaments are great for helping to stabilize your spinal cord in side-to-side movements. And then the other is, okay, what if you move like this way? your filum terminal is going to be helping to keep your spinal cord anchored. So here is a good picture, and it's showing actual spinal cord and, the denticulate ligaments. And it doesn't look like much, but this little connection point here, this little bundle of connective tissue. Here's another one. These little tiny connections, those are the denticulate ligaments, and they help hold, this is a good one right here, side-to-side stabilizations. You're not going to see the filum terminal in this one. You can see part of the arachnoid mater. You can even see some of the wispies there, and some wispies right over here as well, part of the arachnoid mater, which is neat. And then you have your pia mater right there that they are pulling off. Okay, so we talked about the membranes, 3 different types of membranes. We talked about how the spinal cord is connected. And now we're going to talk about 3 different spaces within the spinal column. Okay, so first of all is the epidural space. And so when we look at this picture, I know it's small, but the epidural space is the space here that's filled with yellow, fat-looking stuff. And in fact, what you find in the epidural space is loose areolar connective tissue, adipose tissue, and blood vessels. Yes. So, and in addition, this is the common site for anesthesia injections. Right into that little space. Don't go past that space or past the dura mater, because then you're going to have issues and bad side effects. So you want to make sure you get it in the epidural space and not touch the spinal cord or spinal nerve at all. Okay, so that's your epidural space. Then we have number 2, subdural. Sub means below. Yeah. So below the dura mater is what it's saying. It's filled with serous fluid. So between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater, it's serous fluid. I wonder if I could do this. See, dura, not really. I can't do it. So serous fluid. And then below the serous fluid, we have our cerebral spinal fluid. Okay, so subdural space has serous fluid in it. Subarachnoid, cerebral spinal fluid in it. Okay, and interestingly, there's 2 types of fluid in there. Remember, this is continuous with the brain and the spinal cord. Why would we have, for example, serous fluid between the dura mater and the next layer surrounding our brain? Why do we need to have fluid around our brain? Is it like a cushion? Yeah, definitely. It can act as a cushion. So I'm sure we've all hit our head at some point. When you hit your head, it is going to move around in there a little bit. If you have fluid to help cushion it, you're less likely to bruise your brain if it hits the skull at all, and helps reduce potential damage. So it's definitely cushion protection. Okay, first of all, I want to point out the picture at the bottom here. This exact picture will be on not the quiz on Monday, okay? Which is a serious quiz on Monday, because we did cover a lot of very important material. But the next one we have that involves the spinal cord, you will see this picture, and you will need to be able to identify any structure seen in this picture. Okay, there'll be a word bank, but you need to plan on this now. You will need to know all of the anatomy, cross-section of the spinal cord. Okay, so one easy way to tell the difference between the first 2 structures, the anterior median fissure and posterior median sulcus, kind of tells you which side is anterior versus which is posterior. What's helpful for me is in the anterior side, this, oh, come on. There's this button I accidentally pushed. There's this very deep furrow. Okay, you can see it. If you're looking under the microscope, you can see this gap. And this gap is only, I don't like how I drew that. Oops. This gap is on the anterior side. If we look posteriorly, your posterior median sulcus is right here. And it looks just like a really deep sulcus. You know, when we're talking about the surface of the brain folding in and out. It just looks like a deep dip in. There's no space, though. The sides are touching. Okay? There's no gap involved. So that's what you see on the posterior side of the spinal cord. And the anterior side, the side facing forward, has kind of a larger gap right here. So that can help you if you're identifying structures, is to remember, how can I tell the difference between anterior and posterior when I'm looking at a cross-section of a spinal cord? Okay, so within the spinal cord, we do have both white matter and gray matter. And white matter is myelinated. Since we're talking about the central nervous system, what kind of cell myelinates those nerves? Who myelinates in the central nervous system? What cell? Starts with an O. Oligodendrocytes, yes. Good. Okay. So, that lovely word, see, oligodendrocytes. I can't go into the white. Okay. So, it's myelinated, and what is interesting is that the white matter is on the outside, or the exterior of the spinal cord. So here's the white matter. White matter is all this kind of tan color here. And then the gray matter is the center, and it looks like a butterfly. At least to me, it looks like a butterfly. So with the white matter, there are 3 major columns of tissue. Okay? And so you'll need to be able to know these and identify them. So you have ventral, dorsal, and lateral. What does ventral mean? It's a directional term. Is it the same as posterior or anterior? Okay, so ventral is going to be anterior. So if we had 3 columns, let's take a look. Ventral column, yep, is right here. This is a ventral column, and it is anterior. Dorsal, yeah, back, posterior. So this is our dorsal column here. And then we have, lastly, is lateral, which is kind of convenient, which is a good hint. Lateral is on either side. Okay, so 3 major columns. And just to kind of reiterate the whole bilateral symmetry thing, we could cut it right in half, and it's exactly the same on either side. Okay? So then gray matter, just as a reminder, it's the cell bodies, it's glial cells. There could also be non-myelinated axons. Am I missing anything? Not really. Okay, moving on. So now we looked at the 3 columns of white matter. We had our dorsal, ventral, and lateral. Okay. Now we're going to talk about there's 3 horns of gray matter in the spinal cord. So we have a posterior, anterior, and lateral horn. So posterior, we're looking for gray matter. Here is our posterior horn. Okay. Anterior, right there. And then the lateral is usually a little bump. I'm going to do lateral on this side because it's so nice and tiny. Okay, so dorsal. Did I do that right? Ventral. I like to write on this, and then you can see lateral. Now, interesting thing. So it says posterior or dorsal. Somatic and visceral sensory nuclei. So this is the cell bodies of sensory neurons. That's cool. So that's where the signal, let's say I burnt my finger, travels all the way up to my spinal cord, to the gray matter, right in there, and that information is brought in to the dorsal portion there of the gray matter, the dorsal horn, and is processed, which is pretty cool. Anterior, or these bigger ventral horns, have the somatic motor nuclei. So in that same case where I forgot, what did I do to my finger? I just hurt it. I broke. I have done that before. Okay, so yeah, okay. I broke these two fingers for realsies. The pain would travel up and through the dorsal root of the spinal nerve here and enter into the dorsal horn where it's processed. Okay? Then that information basically is sent to the ventral or anterior horn, which is the nuclei or the cell bodies for motor neurons, which tell muscles to move and all that kind of stuff. Then it can send a signal back out. The signals go out the anterior root and then cause a response like grabbing our fingers or whatever. Okay? So signals go in the dorsal side, signals go out the anterior or ventral root. And then the lateral little bump here, associated with the autonomic nervous system. And so if you remember, the autonomic nervous system can be divided into two sections, our parasympathetic and our sympathetic. Okay? So that little dude right there is involved with that kind of control. And you find it notice you don't find it throughout the entire spinal cord. This lateral horn is only found in thoracic and lumbar regions. Okay, so you're not finding it in the cervical area for sure. Okay? Excuse me. Or in the sacral region. So remember that this lovely little, go away, little lovely horn is thoracic and lumbar only. So that's kind of a unique physical characteristic. Okay, here's a bigger picture of that lovely spinal cord cross-section. And I don't know if I have handouts. I'll have to check. I know the PowerPoint is up on Moodle already. And this is just here for you to study. Okay? I don't think there's anything else on this slide other than just a bigger picture. Nothing else. One thing I want to point out, because this picture is bigger. We have a central canal right down the middle of that spinal cord. Ideas of what may be passing through this little tiny hollow canal. It's a fluid. Cerebral spinal fluid, yeah. So inside there we got our CSF, woohoo, and that also is bathing the outside of the spinal cord and the brain, if you remember that. Pay attention here. Notice our spinal nerve, the one that actually exits out between the vertebra, is really made up of two roots, okay? One that branches from the posterior or dorsal side, called the dorsal root, dorsal root, and then one that branches off of the anterior side, and we would call that the ventral root. They come together to form one main spinal nerve that exits. And just as a reminder, information comes in dorsally, information leaves anteriorly. Okay. We're ahead of this morning. Oh no, we'll stop soon enough. Okay. All right, so some more organization of gray matter. A little bit of a repeat of what we did say. The cell bodies of nuclei. Let me start over, sorry. You know what? We'll continue this on Monday. But hold on, let's see if I can actually